So where do the Wolverines rank in our post-spring Big Ten football 2019 power ratings, and who did the audience select as our Wolverine of the Year? Find all of that out next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and my partner at Wolverine Digest, he'll be joining us a little bit later on in this episode. We'll take a look at how you in the audience voted for our very first ever Wolverine of the Year, the number one University of Michigan or Michigan alum athlete of the 2018-19 school calendar year, now that has concluded. But we begin by taking a look at our post-spring football power ratings in the Big Ten. Now, these are based on my total team talent ratings that I incorporate into my college football preview every year. Here's how it works. Teams are awarded points per player based on the 24/7 composite ratings of the past 4 recruiting classes. So in this case, that's 2016 to 2019. And you're given 5 points for a 5-star, 4 points for a 4-star, 3 points for a 3-star, etc. This also does include the latest transfer in and out information, at least up until April 28th, so over the weekend. If a player has clearly played above his recruiting ranking, then I raise him a star, and thus his team gains a point or more points accordingly. So that helps programs that are developmental in nature, like a Wisconsin, a Michigan State, and Iowa, who routinely overperform their recruiting rankings and gives them credit for the player development that's going on at those universities as well. Fifth-year seniors are only counted in if they definitely factor into the depth chart. Fifth-year seniors just ain't what they used to be in college football. So if you're just occupying one of those 85 scholarships, we don't count you. But if you're definitely on the 2 deep, then you are counted on in the total team talent ratings. So with that set up, here are the latest ratings post-spring. You see Ohio State in first place with 333 points, and yes, that does count the new transfer quarterback to back up Justin Fields from Kentucky. Michigan is second at 317 points. Iowa and Michigan State tie for third at 289 points. Penn State, fifth, 286. So those 3 teams are pretty bunched up right there. And clearly between Michigan and Ohio State, there's a drop-off after those two. Purdue, Jeff Brom's really turned that program around. They're next at 280 points. Maryland right behind them at 279. Minnesota is in 8th. Indiana and Nebraska are tied for 9th at 269 as Scott Frost continues to deal with some attrition as he's rebuilding the roster there. Wisconsin all the way down to 11th at 264 points. Illinois, 250 points. Northwestern, 248. And Rutgers at 214. Here are some notes to make sense of these numbers. Penn State has suffered the steepest point decline from the end of last season until now with its high volume of attrition it's seen in the offseason. At the end of last year, the first time I did these ratings, Penn State's point total was pretty close to where Michigan is at right now. So they've suffered quite a bit in attrition, not just guys leaving early for the NFL, but also just leaving. As for our beloved Wolverines, these numbers already include players that are expected to leave Michigan after school ends, but haven't been announced yet, like, for example, Brandon Peters. He's included in this total. I'm already counting on him not being at the University of Michigan next year when you look at Michigan's total. Next up, consider how high Iowa is in these ratings. And the Hawkeyes lost 3 all Big Ten players early to the NFL draft. So this looks poised to be one of the more talented teams Kirk Ferentz has had, maybe the most talented team since 2010, certainly since the 2015 team that went 12-0 and almost made the college football playoff. My total team talent ratings last year had Michigan State overrated in the preseason, but the Spartans were. When we got to the year, they were only 7-6. But this year, my total team talent ratings say people are sleeping on Michigan State. They'll have better depth than they had a year ago. We mentioned Jeff Brom. It's amazing what he's done there. He's already turned over what was a putrid Purdue roster. They now have got Big Ten level depth on most of the roster. New coach Mike Loxley at Maryland, he is inheriting a pretty competitive roster. That's a team. Even though it's in the Rugged East Division, that's a team that should be in a bowl game in his first season, if he's learned anything since his time in Tuscaloosa, because he was a terrible head coach at New Mexico. Nebraska's overall depth is, they're going to be the girl with the curl. They're the new hotness this offseason, the chic pick. Their overall depth, though, is still behind the Scott Frost hype. But when you look at Adrian Martinez, who, if you saw him in the spring, he looks like a pro right now, and the friendly schedule they have this fall, it may not matter. They may be able to produce a record that goes above where their talent level currently is at. Wisconsin's program, to me, appears to be at a crossroads. So the Badgers were a top 25 overall talented roster heading into last season. They're 11th right now in the Big Ten with all the graduation, attrition, etc. This is looking like a team that could conceivably struggle to get to the 7-5 record that they had last year when they started preseason number 4 and ended up with that disappointing record. And then finally, this just can't be said enough. Pat Fitzgerald's just one hell of a coach, guys. I mean, he's an even better coach than we thought. His team is always near the bottom in these talent ratings since I started him 3 years ago, and yet his team is always right there and competitive when the season ends. I mean, last year they made it to Indianapolis before we did. So whatever they're paying Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, he's earning it. Back here on Michigan Podcast, joined by our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest. Go Blue, Michael. Good to have you back on the show, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Absolutely great. Just waiting for spring to return to Ann Arbor here.
Yeah, we're kind of doing the same here in Iowa. I think it's about 48 degrees and raining outside right now. So, and you know what? As long as it's not snowing, I frankly don't care. Anything other than snow, and I can live with it.
Steve, it's literally 48 degrees and raining in Ann Arbor right now.
Well, there you go. So wherever you are, we're there too. Apparently, let's get to. We're going to unveil. We're going to unveil the results. We let our listeners and viewers on Twitter vote. But I selected 4 nominees just for fun. You know, we're coming up on the end of the 2018-19 academic year at Michigan. So that's really the end of the current sports season. I selected 4 Wolverines as nominees for Wolverines of the year. And the 4 nominees I selected for the audience to vote on. Tom Brady winning yet another Super Bowl. I think he's now surpassed Charles Haley for most Lombardi trophies won in a career. And, of course, he's the GOAT. My other suggestion I had was Iggy Brazdeikis, who was Michigan, the Big Ten Freshman of the Year, Michigan's leading scorer, really one of the most prolific freshman scorers that Michigan basketball has ever had. I also selected Xavier Simpson from Michigan basketball. He was first team All Big Ten defensively, second team All Big Ten overall, had one of the best assist seasons in Michigan history, one of the nation's leaders in assist to turnover ratio. And my fourth selection, Michigan football's consensus All-American, Devin Bush. He was Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, Big Ten Linebacker of the Year, and was just made the 10th pick in the NFL draft by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So those were the four finalists I selected. First of all, are you okay with those finalists?
I'm okay with those finalists, but can I be honest with you, Steve? I think in nominating those four Wolverines, with the exception of Tom Brady, there's a flaw to the other three, but I don't know that there's any better candidates. I think this is a year where there's going to be a flaw in whoever you nominated, if you're sticking to essentially the two big sports, football and basketball. And we can certainly go through those guys, and I can explain why I think there's a little bit of a flaw. Great accomplishments from each of them. But based off of what is maybe lacking from their resume is ultimately how I would pick who the greatest Wolverine was this particular year.
All right, what's the flaw? I had trouble coming up with this list because we didn't have a Heisman Trophy candidate, we didn't have an All-American in basketball, and I didn't really see in the other sports. In the Olympic sports, I didn't really see someone who was heads and shoulders on a national level worthy of kind of transcending those sports that largely operate in obscurity for most people. But what did you see as the flaw in those nominees?
Well, before I get into that, I would agree with you. There were a couple of individual national champions in gymnastics, both on the men's and women's side. But when you look at the men's side especially, I think the women's side's a little bit different because Michigan is not the preeminent program in women's gymnastics. They're somewhere in like the 6 to 10 range. There are some tremendous programs, Georgia and Stanford and Nebraska that's been good the last couple of years, and they've got some. Utah as a consistent one. So I think like her winning it is a pretty good accomplishment. But I would agree that overall it's not like this major someone that's iconic that we all know, like a Sierra Romero from softball a couple of years ago, or maybe Kellen Russell from wrestling. So I don't think that they really kind of bridge the gap between the two biggies and then everything else. So I'm agreeing with you there. When I look at the nominees you fourth here, the only knock on Tom Brady is that he doesn't currently play for the University of Michigan, or he wasn't a University of Michigan guy this past year, and he's won his 6th Super Bowl title. Incredible. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that he's the greatest quarterback of all time. If he's not the greatest player of all time, he's in the top 2 or 3. So again, the only flaw is potentially that he's not a current or wasn't a current student athlete this past year. But I don't think we're going to ultimately hold that against him. When you look at Ignas Brazdeikis, I'll tell you what, Ignas Brazdeikis would be my pick if between now and when this official award is handed out, whenever he decided to do that, he decides to come back for his sophomore year. Because Big Ten Freshman of the Year, putting up the scoring average that he did, really kind of from day one, going out there and producing, scoring double figures, 12 to 15 points per game, a couple of biggies. He had a couple games here and there where he was off, usually against Wisconsin, but was there over and over again, didn't shy away from the limelight. If he comes back for his sophomore year and there's some type of triumphant finish to the end of this year for him, then I would probably go with him because he has the slimmest flaw. Devin Bush and Xavier Simpson, I think, run in the same issue, is that they didn't win anything. Xavier Simpson, and you could say that about Iggy, but Iggy is, again, I think because there's a opportunity for him to have a signature moment and then coming back for his sophomore year and what he could accomplish as a sophomore, being that leader, how that would make us all feel. Xavier Simpson, love the guy. You and I certainly, wrote love letters to him, but what did he ultimately accomplish this year? He had a great hook shot. He was a bulldog. He was a defensive standout. But they lost twice to Michigan State. They didn't win the Big Ten regular season or tournament title. When they got to the Sweet 16, they flamed out in large part because shooters, and he's supposed to be a point guard in John Beilein's offense, and John Beilein's point guards score, and they shoot threes, and he wasn't ultimately able to do those things. And so I think he's knocked a little bit because his resume was incomplete this year. And I think the same thing goes for Devin Bush. Devin Bush, first-round draft pick, awesome. But when you look at the season that he had, he went out in the second half of the Ohio State game. That's not his fault. But by the time, even before he went out of the game, that defense was getting run over, passed over, whichever way you want to look at it. And then he decides to sit out the bowl game. And from all indications, from everything I've heard, he was healthy enough to play in that bowl game and decided to sit out. Now, did he make the right decision? Well, he went 10th overall in the NFL draft. He didn't hurt himself. He put himself in a position to have a great combine. So, yeah, from a personal standpoint, he made the best decision for him, and I can't disagree with it, can't argue with it. But I think the fact that he didn't win anything, he didn't beat Ohio State, he didn't win the bowl game, they didn't play for the Big Ten title, and the same thing for Xavier Simpson, I think that's a little bit of a knock on their resume. And so ultimately, I would pick Tom Brady or Iggy Brazdeikis if Brazdeikis announces he's coming back for his sophomore year.
One final question on this, Michael. I'm going to put the odds at 10%. Over under 10% Iggy Brazdeikis is back at Michigan for his sophomore year.
I think it's over, honestly.
You do?
I think when he looks at it, either 20 years old and, he's playing for that second and third contract in the NBA and he doesn't want to be too old. He wants to be able to get there to maximize his value. But, from everything I've heard, he's not going to be a first-round pick. I think he'll be invited to the NBA Combine. I think he'll have a chance to impress. But he doesn't have the ability to put the ball on the floor from when he's closer to the basket. He can do it. He can shoot with both hands. He's limited a little bit athletically. I don't think he jumps off the page as a first-round guy. And it's not that we've talked a lot about on our show about if you come back for another year, you have to, Jordan Morgan said this perfectly last week, if you come back for a sophomore year, you've got to be able to improve your NBA prospects, and at the very least, you can't hurt your NBA prospects. I don't think Iggy Brazdeikis coming back hurts his NBA prospects. I don't know that it helps his NBA prospects. So what is the value of coming back for a sophomore year then? Is that the opportunity to create a legacy that you leave at the University of Michigan? I think his bravado, his bordering on arrogance. I think the way that the opposing fans hate him, but his fans love him. His teammates love him. I think all of those things could ultimately push him to say, "I'm looking at this. Xavier Simpson's the John Teskey, but if I come back, I'm the superstar. I'm the one that everybody's talking about. I'm the Trey Burke hero. I'm the Charles Matthews comeback. I'm the Moritz Wagner. All these guys that could have gone pro a year earlier, that they came back and everybody got excited about what it meant. I think he could potentially have that similar legacy. I think that's going to be ultimately very appealing to him when he knows that if he comes back, he's not going to hurt his draft stock by returning.
Let's get to some football. We're seeing some post-spring practice college football polls released from The Athletic, CBS, Sporting News, ESPN's first FPI, Football Power Index, which is their analytical projection model, has come out with its first preseason rankings for next year. They actually have Michigan 5th in those FPI analytics. But the rest of the polls I mentioned have Michigan somewhere between 8 and 11. That seems to be where their resting spot is. Is that too high, too low? Your thoughts, Michael Spath?
I think somewhere around 10 to 15 is just fine with this Michigan football team. Look, they've got a lot of pieces coming back offensively, and the Josh Gaddis news has excited you, has excited me. We both think that this offense, this missing piece to the Jim Harbaugh era is finally there, and that Josh Gaddis, they're open to running this type of offense in 2016 and 2018. They probably had a far better chance to beat Ohio State. They might be in the college football playoff twice. I'm really excited about that, but they're missing a lot of pieces defensively. they've got 4 guys up front that, are still relatively unknown. We may know who Michael Dunford is. We may know who Carlo Kemp is. But does the rest of the Big Ten, does the rest of the college football know who those guys are? At linebacker spot, the break probably in Josh Ross. Khaleke Hudson bounced back after a disappointing year. In the secondary, they've got 2 new starters at least. There's a lot of question marks about this team defensively. And until we completely see the offense rise up in big moments and really stick with this Josh Gaddis philosophy, I think there's going to be a little bit of skepticism. So 10 to 15, I think makes perfect sense. Early on in the season, they're going to get an opportunity against Army, who I don't know the consensus of those 4, but I've seen them, picked in the top 25. So they're going to have a chance early on in the year to beat a top 25 team, very likely. And then there's a lot of good teams in the Big Ten. Iowa, Notre Dame's not in the Big Ten, but they're a top 25 team. Iowa, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, all seem to be top 20 teams right now. You throw Michigan State in the mix, could someone surprise like Maryland? Could someone surprise could Wisconsin have a good year after a disappointing season? They're going to have plenty of opportunities to showcase themselves. And so I think 10 to 15 makes perfect sense for where Michigan is right now. I have them as the number 2 team in the Big Ten behind Ohio State.
Finally, what's the mood about the football program locally there in Ann Arbor after what we saw in the spring? May will be a quiet month, and then we'll see players report in June to get ready with their own off-season conditioning with Ben Herbert and the strength and conditioning program and 7-on-7s and all that stuff. I mean, the day we're recording this, the first regular season college football game between Florida and Miami on August 24th, it's only 116 days away. So what's the mood there locally right now for the rest of for Michigan fans around the country? What are you guys thinking there locally?
What it seems is I've been trying to get the pulse of the fan base, and I think the fans want to be super excited. They can look at the offense, what they saw in the spring scrimmage, the pieces coming back with Shea Patterson and the wide receivers and a great offensive line. And I think people want to be jazzed up, but 2016 and 2018 are tempering that excitement level. So if not for 2018, if not for 62 points against Ohio State, if not for the way that it whimpered out against Florida, I think you would have a fan base that would be as frenzied as I've seen since the first year of the Jim Harbaugh era. I think they'd be at a 10 right now. Instead, what I think you have is a muted 10, which is closer to like a 7, where people keep on telling themselves, don't buy in, don't give in. I've got to see it with my own eyes. They've got to show me something. And it's honestly a little bit obnoxious as a sports talk radio show host because I keep on asking these questions, and people will write back like, "I'm not again. I'm, prove it to me. The show me state." And it's like, what are you really going to do with your next 3 months in May, June, July, and into August? Are you just going to sit there and say, well, not until November 25th when they play Ohio State can I actually be excited about this Michigan football team? I don't buy it. I don't think that's true. And yet it seems like that's where the fan base is it's a lot of rhetoric right now. You have to show me something, Jim. You have to show me something, Michigan football, before I'm going to dial this up to a fan.
Great stuff, Michael Spath from Wolverine Digest, WTKA in Ann Arbor. Good speaking with you, Michael. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks here on Michigan Podcast, okay? Go Blue.
All right, thanks so much, guys.
So now that we're into the off season and episodes are bi-weekly, if you're looking for your fix in between trying to keep up with everything that we're covering and talking about here at Michigan Podcast, check out the website, WolverineDigest.com. We give you a little good morning video each day to get you started, something I just roll out of the man cave rack, throw on a hat, and give you a few minutes on what's going on that's Michigan related. We keep you up to date on team news that's and really what a lot of the other great sites and Michigan reporters out there are saying and covering. We keep you up to date in one-stop shopping exclusively here at WolverineDigest.com. So we asked you, who is your Wolverine of the year for the 2018-19 school year? And we just talked with Michael Spath about why I selected these 4 nominees. And out of Tom Brady, Xavier Simpson, Iggy Brazdeikis, and Devin Bush, man, it was close. Tom Brady, though, the GOAT, just edged out Devin Bush by a single percentage point. Tom Brady, your 2018-19 Wolverine of the year, as selected by you, the people. That brings us to our question of the week, and it comes from Quincy. What did you think of Jordan Poole's dad throwing Xavier Simpson under the bus? Now, for those of you that don't subscribe to The Athletic, they did an interview with Jordan Poole's father talking about his decision to leave Michigan after 2 years and enter the NBA draft. And he all but, in fact, I don't even know that it's an all but. He just flat out did it. Threw Xavier Simpson under the bus, said he's not a good enough perimeter shooter. And so therefore, there's just simply, as long as he's the point guard at Michigan, not enough offensive opportunities for Jordan Poole because perimeter defenses focus and collapse on him, knowing Xavier Simpson's not as much of a threat from the outside. There is some truth to that. I mean, I think Xavier Simpson, you know what I think of him. I mean, I love Xavier Simpson. My nickname for him is son-in-law, but that's, probably a pipe dream. But he would be the first to tell you, he needs to improve in that area. So here's why I love Jordan Poole's dad's comments. Because if there's anything we know about Xavier Simpson, after those comments, he's going to be improved in that area next season. Whatever work he was already planning on putting in this offseason, we saw how much he improved, for example, on that beautiful hook shot, on his free throws. He became a reliable clutch free throw shooter for Michigan this year after he was a burden there last year. I mean, they had to take him out of games at the end last year when we were doing hack-a-Z. But this year, he was money at the free throw line. So we saw the time and work and energy he put into that in the offseason. So he was already going to do that on his perimeter shooting anyway. But we have Jordan Poole's dad to thank for the extra in Xavier Simpson's case, the extra effort that Z will be putting in now, just despite Jordan Poole's dad. And hey, it's rough living at Michigan. I mean, your point guard has like the leading assist to turnover ratio in America and is one of the most unselfish assist leading basketball players in program history. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Jordan Poole was just never going to get any good looks playing with a guy like that. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. For the next 2 weeks in between episodes, you can keep up with everything we're doing at WolverineDigest.com as well. Give us a like, subscribe, 5-star review, whether it's YouTube, the podcast platform of your choice. Those are always greatly appreciated. And we appreciate our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to spread the word about what we do here each week on behalf of the Maize and Blue. Until 2 weeks from now, go Blue.